Hi, we're going to do our deepest dive, not deeper than the deep dive, in a segment we're calling Smart Club. And today it's going to be about Cinque Stelle. So let's dive
Ooh.
in. On October 4th, 2009, Italian comedian Beppe Grillo and Gian Roberto Casaleggio, an emergent web strategist, founded the Five-Star Movement, or Cinque Stelle, perhaps the most interesting development in the politics of Europe this century. The anti-establishment populist group has resisted definition or a proper left-right classification, but has turned out to be a rebel force to contend with in Italy, winning municipal, regional, and even national elections, before, of course, a fall, a recent plummet in polls, and the subsequent political crisis engineered by centrist agitator Matteo Renzi against the Conte-led government. With us on our first Smart Club panel to discuss the rise and fall of the Cinque Stelle are Paolo Gerbaudo, sociologist and senior lecturer in digital culture and society at King's College London University, and author of an upcoming book, The Great Recoil, Politics After Populism and Pandemic. I see what you did with the P's there. And I think that's coming out in July, and I think you dropped the cover on Twitter. I saw that. Nadia Urbinati, Italian political theorist and professor of political theory at Columbia University in New York, and author of Me the People, How Populism Transforms Democracy, carefully avoiding the alliteration. So, and we respect that as well. And then Rachel Donadio, Paris-based journalist, contributing writer at The Atlantic, and the former Rome bureau chief of the New York Times. And I will say, even before we start this, I have personally worked in my political life in Italy with candidates associated with Cinque Stelle and using their party apparatus. So I just feel like I should be transparent about that up front. But welcome, y'all. Let's talk, about Cinque Stelle. Like most things, it's a moment in history and it's a movement founded by people. But can we start with the moment? Italy is famously a country with a lack of a political center, or maybe that was true until a man named Berlusconi whacked the whole thing to the right. Nadia, can I ask you just to set the stage for us? The First Republic has fallen,
Yeah, I
Berlusconi.
mean,
Like,
this is an
what is the
interesting.
opening?
My opening on the Five Stars movement has to do with the opening on the Italian system, political system, and party system. This is the story of a party who doesn't want to be a party and cannot avoid being a party. So the Italian democratic system has been since the beginning, since we can go back at the beginning of the 20th century. We start with after World War II, a kind of an indigestible relationship with political parties, particularly because they present themselves after the liberation as the liberators, thus covering one part of the country, the north, and the south was completely outside of this process of parties and liberation together because it was liberated by the Americans and not by the partisans and the party. So there was a kind of dualism in the new Republican Italy, which remained persistently, although we didn't see it until the end of the Cold War, when finally all the ideologies could be lifted, and we saw the reality. And the reality was a disaggregation of parties' life and the constructions of movements after movements, extra parliamentary movement first, and then movements that claim to be the substitution for parties in the name of good democracy, true democracy. So the Five Stars movement wanted to reachieve democracy out of the party's appropriation of it, and in doing so, they had to make two moves. And now they are facing the crisis. The first move declared themselves to be not simply a movement, but an anti-party movement. And as an anti-party movement to enter the political system based on parties. Second important move they made is to declare not to have a physical headquarters system and a physical organizational system, to be simply digital and online. Thus, total movement on the square, because it was spontaneous aggregations, and movements outside of the square by and through this new kind of square through the web. So these two important transformations that change a lot in our parliamentary system and the way of thinking of politics now is facing another important change. And here I stop. This movement is going to be very soon a new party. And this is the story that Paolo Gerbaudo already started telling us in the newspaper Domani a few days ago. And so we are in front of ourselves with a movement born to be an anti-party and forced to be a party.
And then, Paolo, can you tell us a bit more about Beppe Grillo? You know, maybe sort of for the American audience, a Jon Stewartish figure, but certainly with a twist, because there is a man at the center of this as well, and certainly it's come back this week.
Completely. Beppe Grillo is really, in a way, the synthesis of this party's potential and of its flaws. He is a figure that became very famous because of his satire, because of his very histrionic character, and because of the way in which his comedy was increasingly about politics and criticism of corporations. In a way, was running in parallel to the anti-globalization movement at some point. Criticism of technology at some point, though then he becomes a technophile. He goes from smashing computers on the stage to becoming a techno-utopian. And that's the moment when he meets Casaleggio, this web guru that really becomes instrumental in his success. And in a way, initially, really the public, the groups of people he gathers around him are the people that, the spectators of his shows, right? He's a person who tours Italy all the time with these shows, with these raging attacks against the political class, against corporations, and so on and so forth. But then progressively it broadens this public to other people. So it's not anymore the middle class that goes to these shows, right? And the people like them, but also increasingly people who are really in trouble. I mean, people who are from basically what once upon a time we would have called the working class, right? Or what today people would call the precariat. People who are unemployed, people who are earning very little, people who are very insecure, people who are very precarious. That's a bit, in a way, the kind of miracle, right, that he manages to pull off. I mean, recently he has been in the news for something really sad, and which is basically because he furiously defended his son, who is accused of involvement in gang rape, right? So which is really troubling, and it tells you of how flawed also the movement was, starting from his leader. But I think that all in all, it's a movement that needs to be understood in a complex way, because it is the largest party in Italy, right? I mean, it had 30% in the polls last time around, and to a great extent, it was precisely because it managed to represent people who were not represented by anyone, starting with workers and the poor.
Mm.
Initially, though, and Rachel, especially as an American who was so steeped in working in Italy, you know, throughout some of this time, initially it's a call to action. You know, quite literally, you know, a fuck you movement, fuck you days come. What is your impression of the people who initially were coming to those? You know, is it the precarious workers who Paolo's talking about? I mean, it's obviously a wide swath of society if it's going to start adding up to 30% a few short years later.
Exactly. In the early days, the party was very much a web platform. And I think what we need to understand, what sets this movement apart from other political movements in Italy, is that it had the most developed web infrastructure of any party or movement in Italy. And so people would go to Beppe Grillo's blog, and it would be a place to talk about all kinds of issues, whether local, not in my backyard issues or larger issues, foreign policy issues, a kind of anger and discontent that Grillo was able to capture. Now, the party evolves and develops to the point that it does quite well in the elections in 2013, February 2013. Generally, when a party does well in Italy, it's also because the other parties are doing badly. And so it absorbed a lot of the momentum of some of the, let's say, centrist parties on the right and the left, the PD and Forza Italia at the time, that just were not seen as having a lot of momentum. Forza Italia in 2013 was already on the decline because Berlusconi in 2011 had stepped down, a victim of his bad management of the country's economy during the Euro crisis. The PD, the center left, main Democratic Party has constantly had multiple identity crises. First, it couldn't figure out where it stood, whether it was the heirs of the Christian Democrats or of the communists. Now it has a kind of Italian version of the AOC versus Hillary Clinton kind of wings, where it can't decide if it's, like social democrats or progressives. And so because of the confusion in some other parties, the Five Star Movement took that momentum. It did extremely well in the 2018 elections in Italy. And I was in Piazza del Popolo for the Atlantic at the last rally of the Five Star Movement in 2018. And I talked to people, and some were former communists, some were former voters of far-right parties, and so it really absorbed a lot of discontent. But what made it do so well in that election was promising universal basic income and having kind of an ambiguous line about, we want more sovereignty, we don't really like Europe, but we don't really want to leave Europe, but we kind of are upset about it. I mean, it captured a lot of different contradictions, and that is really what caused it to get more than 30% of the vote in 2018. Promising universal basic income, which went over very well in the South, and capturing a lot of free-floating discontent that did not find a clear expression in some of the more mainstream parties. I'll conclude by saying one other thing, which is that while Grillo has remained kind of the soul and the godfather of the party, it is always unclear who is leading this party. And in fact, in technical terms, in 2017, before the 2018 elections, the Five Star Movement was refounded, and the kind of owners of its database of voters, and this will turn out to be important, are Davide Casaleggio, the son of Gian Roberto, the web guru who founded the platform that became the movement, and Luigi Di Maio. So they kind of own the party in certain ways. And so Grillo remains spiritually connected, but he could actually never be in parliament because he had a conviction for involuntary manslaughter in a car accident, and which means he could never actually be an elected official. So Grillo remains a kind of godfather figure. Then there's Di Maio and Davide Casaleggio, who kind of own the party. But then there are other currents in the party, and it's founded in this kind of direct democracy way so that we're never really sure who's leading it. And this is also one of the reasons why it's in such a crisis today. But to conclude, I mean, it kind of absorbed a lot of free-floating political discontent that needed a direction.
Which everyone wants to do, but so few actually pull off. So Nadia, it occurs to me to wonder how ideologically flexible, to use sort of a slightly dangerous term, do you find the Cinque Stelle, and how does that play out? Let's actually talk about it.
Yeah, that is the characteristic of Five Stars movement since the beginning, capable of including different issues or different claims without specifying basic principles of orientation, so that it could be in favor of universal income, but also against the immigrants. And thus to be in between the right and the left, actually above or below or outside or behind them, and thus capable of attracting all. Moreover, this flexibility showed itself in the selections of the candidates. I remember the first important moments in which they entered the campaign, the electoral campaign for administrative elections, and they elected the mayor of one of the most important industrial cities in the north, Parma. And they used to select their candidates by asking for CVs. They were looking for objective, meritocratic sign of competences without attachment to any ideologies. Actually, they were this kind of objectocracy, I call them, looking for the objectivity without ideologies and without partisanship, and meritocracy and technocratic smartness. All this together gave them different inputs inside. People who were more neoliberal, people who were more protectionist, people who were more socially oriented, and others more against social interference of the state. So different orientations, but that became a problem once they had to rule. So the first things we see that once they are in government, both in Parma, immediately the clash started in Parma when the new mayor, very competent, but at the beginning not at all a politician, so incapable of using his power against the Five Stars and the other parties, he decided to step out and to abandon the party and to create his own list. And this was the beginning of a process of articulations of many movements inside of these movements. So that at the end, as soon as they start entering the government, particularly recently in 2018, they showed that they could stay with the right and with the left, with the League and with the party, democratic parties. And in doing so, they became kind of chameleontic to the point that they lost some people instead of achieving strength. No, now, apparently, although 32% in terms of numbers in the seats in parliaments, they are around 18% in the audience. So they slash practically the half. This means that they have to position themselves. They cannot simply float in the middle of everything, being bipartisan when is necessary or very strongly oppositional when necessary. And this is what Giuseppe Conte is trying to do, to position these to become party movements into a between center left, so that is going to compete with the PD in this case, clearly, because they are focusing on the same electorate. So they are looking for alliance, but it's an alliance that will cover what? What kind of electorship is going to attract? I agree with Rachel in this case. They attract in the South people who are jobless, in looking for support and assistance. In the north, they don't have support, and in the north, they will use perhaps the PD. So it's a kind of alliance that is functional somehow, capable of covering parts of the of countries that neither of the two parties capable of doing. So perhaps it's a functional, would be a functional alliance
Confederation.
for peace. Sorry.
A confederation more than an alliance, or an
Yeah,
alliance of two
exactly.
people trying to park a car in the same
Yeah.
spot.
Rachel, sorry, you want to jump in?
Then
Then I have a question
for
for Paolo.
I just want to jump in. I mean, you mentioned the term ideologically flexible. I think we need to be careful with the term ideology because I also think we could introduce the term opportunism. I mean, they came into power with this platform that they would only serve a certain number of terms, that they would give a certain amount of their salaries as elected officials to Casaleggio's system that runs the web platform. Many of them haven't done that, and so now there's a lawsuit about money, and they came into power saying we want to be against the system, and now they're in parliament and don't want to leave parliament because they kind of like it there. So there is a certain amount of opportunism, and that also comes through. Luigi Di Maio came into power skeptical of NATO, and now that Draghi is running the government has become much more Atlanticist, and Luigi Di Maio is foreign minister. So there's always been a certain amount of opportunism in Italian politics, not just Italian politics, but so it's really just a question of power and who can harness that. And then it's not like we go to this party because this is what it believes in, but the party, which was founded on a kind of marketing skill, understands like what do people maybe want and therefore will go meet them there. There's always been an interesting tension between we're setting the agenda ideologically and people will follow us, and we're listening to what's out there and we're setting our policies based on what people want. And I think the Five Star Movement does that more than other parties, in part because it was founded basically as the political arm of a web marketing consulting firm. And so it has quite a lot of skills in doing that. Giuseppe Conte, who was prime minister in two governments with the Five Star Movement, he is not actually a member of the Five Star Movement. So he might be able to be the leader of a centrist bloc, but he's not technically in the party. And according to the bylaws of the party, in order for him to request membership, there would be like a 6-month delay before he would be allowed to vote in the own party elections for party leaders, because the way the Five Star Movement works is there's this web platform, Rousseau, and all the members vote to elect the new leader. And so he might not even be able to do that technically. This is a technicality which other parties should be able to overcome, but it does speak to some of the many internal contradictions of this movement.
And to the quick rise, right? There's maybe not all the I's and T's have been dotted in their charter. But Paolo, to be, really to break down a little farther, I think especially what people in America find surprising, they have governed both with Lega, with the right, and with the center left, the PD currently. What has that looked like, and what have they accomplished through that? Because obviously that is a huge, obstacle, but obviously it must be an opportunity for something.
Yes, I think that they have an ideology. So sometimes, I mean, this flexibility is not down to the fact that they are deprived of ideology. Their ideology is this anti-political elite stance, right? And they voice it not because they hate politics as such, but because many people have grown wary of the political class, because the political class is seen as favoring economic elites, is seen as favoring this discourse that we cannot have the good things, right? Austerity, responsibility, so-called. And this is a discourse that can align both with the left and with the right, which explains why they've been in government with Lega and in government with the Partito Democratico. The first coalition in 2018 came after 1 month and a half of negotiations with Lega, a populist right party. So it was described as the populist coalition because it was the two, in a way, two souls of populism, as it were, that we have been seeing around the world. Right-wing populism and perhaps kind of mild left-wing populism in the case of Five Star reunited, right? But in a context where right-wing populism at the upper end ultimately, because Salvini from the Ministry of Interior started using that as a sort of warship through which to bombard both the left and his own allies, right? Attacking them all the time, taking away from them some motives, including the anti-case motive, and polarizing people more around issues having to do with immigration, right? So actually, the movement of votes away from the Five Star and towards the right started with the government during the alliance between the Five Star movement and Lega, right? To the point that Salvini felt so emboldened, he thought he could force snap elections. But there was a moment of hubris, the typical moment when politicians think they are stronger than they are, and it completely recoiled upon him spectacularly. And it was also the moment when Conte actually became a politician and not a puppet anymore, in a way. It was quite an extraordinary moment in politics. It really shows, in a way, how politics is really not just a projection of social forces, but a theater of its own where things happen. Because there was this famous debate in the Senate with Salvini next to him and Conte basically treating him a bit as a kind of father treats a stupid son, like, patting him on the back, Matteo, you're a bit crazy and stuff. And it was a complete humiliation for Salvini. And it was a moment where Conte demonstrated he actually had leadership skills. And that people liked him because he was quite a decent person. I mean, someone who was not like the other people, right? So then this coalition with Partito Democratico began, which looked quite interesting because it looked a bit as a sort of recapitulation of social democracy adapted to the conditions of the 21st century. They started talking about minimum wage, which in Italy we don't have. We are the only country in the EU, except for Austria and Sweden, that doesn't have a minimum wage. And salaries in Italy are at the lowest of most OECD countries, most Western European countries, right? They started really kind of mobilizing interesting moderate social democratic policies. So it looked really, really hopeful. But then we know what happened, right? With these blitz by Renzi, clearly allied with other figures against Conte and this new center-left alliance, which, despite being moderate, right, and Conte is often described as a Christian Democrat of the left, because indeed he is a Christian person with some social values coming from the social teachings of the church, but no more than that. But already that was unacceptable for the Italian establishment, that something like that could exist, right? That minimum, very small gains could be made for the popular classes. It was already too much, right? That's why they toppled him.
It's, it's interesting when you look at how they sort of occupying the same space and how Conte sort of, you talking about him becoming a politician. He really did seem to have this COVID bump, that it sort of spoke towards technocratic competence, these things that are going in. Nadia, what do you think? Who gets to inherit the 15% is, I guess, what I'm asking. Is it this new space in the center that speaks towards a squishy gray area between the Contes and the Draghis of the world? Or does this space dissolve back into its natural tendencies on the left and the right, where they belong, some might
Well,
say?
this is precisely the issue today, in my view, because the Conti's project to become the leader of the Five Stars movements and of potentially the coalition with the uh, uh, Democratic Party, because they are constructing the coalition in view of the new elections. The idea is to cover the entire 32 plus and to reach the 40%. So to
Yeah.
reconfirm the thickness of both parties and expand a little bit at the expense of the left. Of the center. I don't know whether this can be achieved because but I can think that it is a reasonable project. Why is a reasonable project? You see it from the opposite because there are so many people against this project, many in the media, many inside of the central right, many within the television talk shows and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of attention to what people don't want. Who are the people who don't want? Those who didn't like Conte, those who are establishment based, and they are somehow they consider this plebeian reconfiguration of the coalition politics in Italy. They don't like. They don't like the Five Stars movement. The Five Stars movement for the establishment is plebs, and they dislike radically. So what this want in moment is what they want to is to avoid, to prevent this coalition. And thus there is a bombing every day, attacking on this possibility by destroying the legitimacy of the Five Stars. Now, of course, Grillo gives them a great opportunity to score
Yeah.
because he's in a very bad moment. Now, this means that in the future, in my view, in the future, it will be very interesting to see constructions of this alliance between the PD and the Five Stars movement. And in my view, it is a well-grounded alliance. Many people want it, although not the people who define and decide over the opinion. So there is a split in this country between opinion makers and people outside. Very truly, I mean, you can taste it. You can feel it when you are here.
Rachel, you look like you want to jump in on that.
I think it's a really interesting point. Remember that after the 2018 elections, when Renzi was still leading the PD,
See, there's the magic name. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
right, his party did historically badly, but he still wouldn't step down as party leader. He refused to make an alliance between the Five Star Movement and the PD, saying, the Five Star Movement are these we can't trust these weirdo populists. We're not going to do the alliance. So maybe, things have maybe changed now with Conte. But I also think when we talk about the establishment in Italy, I mean, like, everyone is the establishment. At this point, the Five Star Movement is the establishment. And
Yeah, but not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. All right. Well, they're fans of the Five Star Movement in some elements of the media in Italy, and I think the connection between the mainstream media and the political parties is one that's very important in Italy, more maybe than in other countries, where even though, like, print newspapers, which have plummeting newsstand sales, like, people are not reading these, but they're still important. Also the televisions, and so who is promoting what agenda in the mainstream media, television, newspapers, is important. But as we see, both the Lega and the Five Star Movement have done extremely well communicating through social media and the internet. And if I have one regret in my years as Rome bureau chief of the New York Times between 2008 and 2013, it's that I don't feel like I took the web seriously enough, because I was kind of talking to the establishment, like, well, that's what the establishment says, and I do think there is a kind of sentiment that the Five Star Movement taps into, but there is also, I think that the more historic political parties have not been able to adapt in a certain way. I'm never entirely clear where the pure politics and personalities end and where the ideological battles begin. So I don't know if the establishment that Nadia is talking about is pushing against Conte and against
yeah.
a five-star
Oh, yeah.
alliance
This is clear.
because of his views or the views of the party, or because they just think like this guy's incompetent. I mean, the whole behind the scenes of the like Draghi coming in, the establishment line is like, we can't trust these people with the bailout, with the recovery funds, right?
May I give you an example? May I give an example? Just one. One of the reasons why all my friends in the news, particularly the newspapers, Huffington and people in the Repubblica and La Stampa, they were upset with the government and Conte, truly upset. Why? One of the reasons, the most important, because his PR, public relation and he was a member, he was an actor coming from the Big Brother reality show, and they were obsessed by being offended by transforming the government into the place of the reality show people. And so they refused even to talk to him.
Berlusconi, you know, I mean, didn't they remember the Berlusconi chapter? But
Berlusconi came from the north. He came from Milan. They come from the south. So the north is ruling in this moment the country. The north
underestimate how No, the press guy for the five-star movement famously doesn't return anybody's call in the mainstream media. But I don't know if that, which is irritating, but I don't know if that's what is like the ultimate symbol of establishment.
It's not a good strategy. I will say that.
No.
You know, folks with different ideologies, I'll just throw some out there. You know, Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn. When you work on those campaigns and you meet the campaigners and you're hanging out, they're movement people. They're movement people. They have a certain vibe. It's hard to describe. That is the vibe I got from working with Cinque Stelle people, especially on the ground in Liguria for this last regional election. Was the folks, you know, it was a PD, you know, five-star alliance, and the kind of people who were very active on those campaigns were five-star movement people, you know, like people who go to meetings and they are very engaged. And so I think they're amply establishment but engaged people. Where are they going to go, Paolo? Where is their home? It's a very specific person, but it's a very important person because it's the person that the PD can't seem to hold on to, right? Yeah. This is their last 10% they never get.
Good.
I mean, I think that you really need to understand what is going on in terms of a volcanic politics. Because all the structures of representation, of popular representation that were there in the post-war period become sclerotic, and they are falling down, right? So the trade unions and all the socialist parties and communist parties that were giving a channel for people's demands, to voice people's anger, to voice people's interest, are not there anymore. So what happens is that you have a dual society, right? I mean, the integrated people who are part of trade unions or civic associations who somehow feel represented. That's basically the middle class these days. And then you have a growing and growing section of the population that doesn't fit anywhere. Right? The working class of before has become the middle class now because they have gone through their social mobility, right, in the 60s and the 70s. And that's the PD, which is now the party of pensioners and civil servants, fundamentally. These are the figures that are the most important ones. But then you have these huge ocean of people that are not represented by anyone, and it's like a geyser that whenever it finds a hole, whenever it finds a channel, it will use it for however flowed it is, right? It doesn't matter how flowed it is. The most unlikely vessel, if there is an opening in the system, it will exploit that opening. Much as it happened with Corbyn, right? That it surprised anyone. How the hell did this happen? This was impossible. Yes, because there was a very small opening and the unrepresented used it to the full extent. Same thing with Bernie Sanders, right? During the primaries. Nobody in 2016 was expecting it would come so close to snatching away the nomination from Hillary Clinton. But again, it's because there is all this pent-up anger, and whenever it finds a space to use it, it does. Same thing with the five-star movement, right? It has, in a way, unwittingly become the vessel of popular anger. I think now there are two possibilities. There is sort of a bifurcation, two possible paths. There are people who want to normalize the Five Star Movement, including Di Maio, want to turn it into yet another liberal party, into yet another centrist party, as if we didn't have enough liberal centrist parties in Italy. There's more centrist parties in Italy than there are centrist voters. And the other thing is basically to take a stance and say, we are standing for working people, we are standing for poor people that unfortunately are not represented by Partito Democratico. Let's be clearer about what kind of interest we represent, because it is impossible to represent the people. You always represent a section of the people. And let's be clear about it, and let's connect our demand for democracy, which is fundamental, with a demand to represent the rights of those who are not economically represented now in the system.
So I also would ask, do you think, and I will throw this to anyone who wants to answer it, but so much of what seems like the big boon to the right parties at the expense of the center left has been a sense of community that the parties used to foster. Being a communist meant that you had a social life. You think being a member of the Socialist Party and stuff like that. Did the Five Star provide that sense of community that some folks were leaving and as that way came in? And how much do you think Rousseau, which is of course the name of their digital platform, has to do with that? And is that one of the legacies that's going to come out of this, is that you have to be building community, especially in a digital way?
If I say so, I was in the South when when the Five Stars movement won in the 2013 in the regional elections. Won, they entered in the competition, and I saw many people organizing meetups and associations connected to the Five Stars movement. Something that you could find in the past with the Democratic Christians or even Forza Italia, Berlusconi's one, or other movements. So there is a permanent quest for community or associations based on some interest, not simply faith or beliefs, some strong interest. And yes, the Five Star movement was able to replace the previous ones and to do it in a way that was functional to the disaggregating reality, which is the south of the country. They replaced practically what after World War II was the qualunquismo, the uomo qualunque movement. It was an anti-party movement collecting people, transforming the parliament as they want to by abolishing elections and substituting elections with the lottery. That was 45. So, and they had in the South still today this sense of anti-party, which is a form of community. Is we versus them. Is we versus North, those who are inside, those who are always fortunate. There is a sense of resentment plus revenge. Resentment plus revenge. And this is connected to the sense of community that you were looking for.
Yeah. In this, I think the Five Star movement and the Yellow Vest movement in France actually share many things in common. And the difference, I was saying this to Nadia earlier, one of the differences between Italy and France is that in Italy, the political opposition is in parliament, like the Five Star movement. And in France, it's like on the street, the Yellow Vest movement, which is a similar kind of volatile anti-party, anti-establishment sentiment, mobilizes through the web and kind of wants to hang out together like at roundabouts and, be together. And I think that that's something very important that the Five Star movement has captured, which certainly the PD has lost. Like the PD is like a kind of intellectual thinking, disconnected from the on-the-ground reality, unfortunately, party. But I also think that, as you mentioned, Rousseau, the digital platform, that is really important. I mean, who controls the data might control the party, or who. And I think that is an important question for the legacy. And I also think it's something that other parties have looked to. The Brexiteers went to visit the Five Star movement to visit Casaleggio to find out, how does this platform work? How have you been able to kind of figure out how to, harness discontent into kind of political action? And that net roots and that digital thinking and platform is important. And I think that will last.
but very few people participate. The South is very disconnected, is not very connected with the web. And how can they get along? Because it's, how many people participate in the voting in the referendum? They have many referendums, 40,000. 40,000 of participation. So it's not so much participation through the web, which is a scam sometimes, because
It's
when
literally
they want people to vote in favor of what they want, they frame the question in a way that you vote yes by voting no. This is what they do. It's
Yeah, and certainly referendums are notoriously, one of the least democratic things that you can do. I mean, look, in that way, it's sort of super effective. I mean, Paolo, I would ask you, I mean, do you see other parties? Obviously everyone, as has been said, was super curious and what's going on with this 5 stars and kind of taking them apart. Who do you see now emerging as maybe the international inheritors of this movement besides the yellow vests on the streets of Paris?
Yeah, because I think you need to give it to them, to the 5 star, that have been very innovative, very
Internationally.
Yes, I mean, there's many other parties that have followed on the 5 star footsteps, implicitly or explicitly. I think that there is a gamut of left populist party, though again, like defining 5 star as left is very difficult. One could in terms of class background and socioeconomic issues, but obviously there's Podemos in Spain, right, which also has a participatory platform. There's La France Insoumise in France of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. What is very interesting now in Britain, I don't know if you've heard about the Northern Independence Party, which is a party that started a bit like a joke, like an internet meme, because it advocates independence of Northumbria, which was a Saxon kingdom.
They're coming on next week, actually. Yeah.
In the 10th century. And it's super interesting, I find. I mean, now they actually are contesting an election, by-election in Hartlepool. But what is really interesting is they describe themselves as democratic socialists, right? I mean, in terms of along the lines of Corbyn and Sanders. But what is interesting, what they said, is that if we go around and say we are socialist or democratic socialist, nobody listen to us. If we say we stand for the independence of a territory, so we say basically we're populist, territorial populists in a way, suddenly everyone listen, what is going on here, which I think is quite interesting. So that is another example of digital party. And I think there's Razem in Poland. Actually, there's plenty of formations now that are using a bit this new template, which expresses also, I mean, I think a key element there is distrust of party structures and of political structures as a cartel. This idea of Richard Katz and Peter Mayer, that politics and society has become like a cartel, right? Like economic cartels controlling prices, controlling supply. This is what Nadia was saying about the media, right? The media have become cartels. They've always been, but they become more so recently, right? They are controlling supply of information. Yeah. That is why suddenly everybody's surprised when this party scores those results in the election. Guess what? Because the people who were supposed to inform us are instead there to prevent people being informed and people actually knowing what is going on. The same thing applies to parties. Parties these days are there to a great extent not to represent people, but to control people. They are representing the state among the people rather than representing people in the state. So this is a general pathology of society, this cartelization of everything. Parties, cultural system, media, social organization, and so on and so forth, which inevitably leads to these mercurial and kind of magmatic formations to emerge and use any tool they have. Really, anything that works can be used as a vessel for this popular mobilization.
But the 5-star movement and the Lega it had television, which was important, but the 5-star movement did well without having, mainstream media support to a certain extent. You could argue, I mean, we could get into really technical debates about who owns the media in Italy, but I think that when you use the term cartel, you could also use the term like interest groups and things like that. Cartel
Interest group.
dealers. And as a member of the media, I feel like it's not always like thuggish and antagonistic. And the fact that these parties have done well, they've done well in spite of some of the mainstream media. So, I mean, I just want to call you on that word.
I would like to add to this.
And Rachel, do you think, sorry, Nadia, go ahead. No, Nadia, go ahead, please.
No,
Right.
this is important what she said, because we are no longer in the Habermasian public sphere in which there is a plurality of quasi-anarchical society developing associations and medias freely. Here we have medias that are owned by corporations they have many interests vested inside of the parliament and the government. In particular in Italy, we have three big owners owning everything, all the televisions and the newspapers and the platforms also, Huffington. And they defined actually the goal of politics. They give a goal to politics, and they present themselves, and many people use this, people that I know, friends of mine and political theorists, they say, look at, this is a power that doesn't have any form of accountability, because in the name of free speech or free associations, they really operate in the thick way, in the thick world of politics, imposing agendas. This is what we have now. So it needs to be analyzed better, this domain of media and freedom of media, not freedom, media and organizations. I don't know whether we call cartel or interest-based media, but it's a problem for me. In Italy, at least, I feel it.
Would the knowing what they know now, would the cartel or interest group, depending on how thuggish they want to be, actively prevent the rise of the next 5-star? Right?
Yeah.
Is this something you think they didn't see coming and are regretful, or like, we could have stopped that if we'd actually given it the attention it deserved in the very beginning?
They stopped the government, and they did so in a way that was fantastic, because we have, for the first time after 45, the first time a government collapsed without even the parliament voting against it. Conte didn't even go toward in the parliament to ask for confidence or does not confidence. He simply resigned to the president, and the president. So it was a very strange system of transition to. And the bombing, the attack against the government was since the last year every day. We with some friends, also Paolo was at a certain point involved. We had last June, May actually, a document, a letter, in order to prevent this everyday attack against the government. This was May 2020. We received in 24 hours 25,000 signatures. It was a splash. It means that there is a separation between what the media say and what the people would like to have. Unfortunately, I don't like to play the game of populists, but this country is incredibly divided and polarized.
I mean, Paolo, what would you say about that? Does this represent a kind of victory of the elites that's going to fuel the next,
I mean, it's amazing
wave
because
of anti?
Yeah. It's amazing because Nadia is very critical of populism, and rightly so. But it tells you that the situation is now beyond a point where really also you need to give it right to certain populist forces for what they stand there to represent. And I think it's really a matter of what kind of solution there will be to this deadlock, right, between establishment and forces that stand there to represent popular interests. In Italy, we have a system that is very opaque, is very Byzantine in the way in which the president of the republic is supposed to be only a symbolic figure. By some, actually has a lot of power. That is why also the Partito Democratico really wants to keep the Presidente della Repubblica. And often this institutionalism, this idea of institutional responsibility, especially born by Partito Democratico, right? We are the people standing for the Italian Republic, for the institutions, guaranteeing the continuation of the nation, the pillar party, engenders automatically, on the other hand, this kind of populist dynamic, right? Because people say, so is responsibility paying people so little? is a responsibility doing whatever you're told by Brussels technocrats, sometimes even more just because they say so. And therefore, it really creates this divide, this yawning gap between many people, especially in the South, as Nadia was saying, and the people who are standing there to represent them. I think that now a lot will depend on what Conte does. If Conte manages to refound the movement, right? In May, the Five-Star Movement will have a new assembly. It also needs, in a way, to get rid of the figure of Grillo, which is now a huge liability for the movement. Conte is widely appreciated by Italians because he looks like a decent person. And being minimally decent as a human being is a plus in Italian politics these days. It is a plus. He has demonstrated he's a person who cares. He's a moderate, but he cares. That's already enough for people to have trust in him. But it is going to be a very difficult game because of all these things, because of all this resistance. And also because perhaps Conte is too much of a technocrat to be populist enough, right, to mobilize people, right? An element of the Five-Star Movement was
maybe he wasn't reframed, he wasn't reborn as a politician, quite politician-y enough in his rebirth.
Yeah, in the sense that
Rachel, I also especially. No, go ahead, Paolo.
No, I think. Sorry to interrupt. I mean, it's just that the center left. The center left has this problem with channeling people anger, as if anger was wrong, right? But sometimes people are angry for good reasons, and you need to channel it in a right way, in a good way. But you need to understand why people are angry.
Exactly.
So in an election like in America, where you saw Joe Biden win, but the Democrats lose seats in the House of Representatives because the anti-establishment backlash vote is still very much present in America, do you see lessons in Five Stars rise and perhaps fall for an alliance that happens in an America where people on seemingly different ends of the spectrums are disaffected for the same reasons?
I always find it hard to make direct analogies between Italy and America, in part because Italy has so many different small parties and there's so much pure politics and there's so much kind of...
In a way, but there's still two teams. That's what I always say. You know, they rearranged the deck chairs, but there's still two teams.
Well, I mean, then I think I think that the divisions within the center-left in Italy are similar to the divisions within the center-left in the United States, in that you have kind of the progressives and the more mainstream. So you have the kind of Renzeites who are more like Hillary Clintonites, and then you have the AOCs who are maybe a little bit like Five Star, but also a little bit like, I don't know, they're younger and more...
Ellie Schlein.
Kind of even more, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I also think Italy doesn't really have like a green movement in the way, so much in the way that Germany does, for instance. And so, I mean, I think that generationally, I'm curious how young people will vote. I mean, in France, we found that a lot of young people are actually voting for the far right. They're actually supporting the far right. In Italy, maybe I think, you asked about lessons from the U.S. election. I mean, there isn't like the kind of centrist establishment figure, like Biden-like figure. There's Draghi, who's running the country, but he's a technocrat. And I actually think that the most brilliant politician is the most despised and despicable in certain ways, and that's Renzi. The person who actually captures a certain kind of centrist bloc would be Draghi, but I don't really see him going to play pure politics. I mean, I think the centrist voters who might go to Conte would definitely go to Draghi, but Draghi doesn't, maybe, I don't know, I don't call the guy, but I don't get the sense that he wants to get in the mess of Italian politics. So
he wants to float on top for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. It's hard to answer your. It's hard to answer your question. Except I'll say some of the similar impulses that are animating political debate in the United States, in Italy, in other countries in Europe: generational divides, precariousness, the ability to get a job, the ability to get a mortgage, the ability to raise a family, the ability financially to survive. Those are real things, as certainly in Italy, and no party has really done a great job capitalizing on that. I think Paolo makes a really important point about the center left being unable to capture anger. I mean, the five-star movement, in the cities they've governed, they've done really badly. The cities have not been governed terribly well, right? So, I mean, again, it's like you can capture the anger, but who's going to govern and actually make people's lives better? And I don't think anyone has a good answer to that in Italy at the moment.
Well, I would like to integrate what you were just saying with the 3 points. First, the institutional system in Italy is not presidential. So even if you have a good leader, he needs to have a parliamentary alliance, and this makes a leader never alone. But in the United States, the White House is there, and it is for one person, not for a coalition, for one person. And that the great Biden, who started moderate, but sincerely moderate, because Renzi is not sincerely moderate. Renzi is a populist moderate. He does everything for himself. He has a very, King Mida kind of disposition toward power, money, and presence. Doesn't have any kind of ideas. At least the moderate Biden had strong ideas. And the moderate understood that in order to take away support from Trump, a future Trumpist also, he had to be radical. He had to take a radical change. This is what we don't have in Italy. In Italy, people are scared of being radical in their choice because they expose themselves. And in this climate of alliance and parliamentary, nobody wants to be disclaimed by others. So you need cooperation, collaboration, compromise, and thus you don't want to be radical. As the great Kelsen used to say, if you want to destroy radicalism, you create a parliamentary system. This is what we do today. I mean, this is clear. What is important then, the other element of that, this is relevant in my view, is Europe. Because to be in the European Union, beginning with the 90s, it means that this technocratic way of solving problem solving to technocracy, this infiltrated in all member states. Many member states now assume the mental habit of solving problem through technicalities without looking for party oppositions or ideological or right and left or whatever. So there is the sense, as Rosanne Baron said, the only way that in Europe we feel that we can destroy or defeat populism is by deflating political competition or deflating the oppositional moments and expanding the non-political decision-making sectors. This is what we do. So in some sense, there are two ways to exit populism, perhaps. The American way, a strong alternation kind of relationship of power, one against the other one, but always politics. In Europe, is more a way out of conglomeration of many interests under a kind of moderate technocrat or leader kind of, not more bipartisan than partisan. Seems to be.
Paolo, I'll give you the last word because we're coming up on it. But do you think the answer is, they say famously, trust is lost in buckets and gained in drops. And obviously that's sort of a problem with the people who we're trying to get. I mean, is the answer social democracy, except nobody trusts anyone to deliver it to them properly? Or is it not that simple?
I think social democracy is coming back big time. And partly what Biden is doing, lurching to the left, like veering to the left, is really positive. I mean, I criticized Biden a lot during the primaries, but I think one need to give to him that he's doing positive things, and these are things that are very hopeful because nobody really wants to bet on collapse and after collapse, whatever the socialist paradise. I think we really need things that are practical, that are pragmatic, that solve people's problems. But you need to recognize now that if someone today stands in a situation like Italy for policies only, right, it doesn't capture something there in the public imagination. And this thing in the public imagination is the problem of democracy. We cannot have the nice things because there are people there who are preventing us from having the nice things. It's not just chance, right? It's not just a random thing. So the crucial problem and the slogan of the popular forces should be democracy. Because if all this is happening, it's because we don't have democracy. They call it democracy, but it is not, right? As the indignados say. Which doesn't mean that we need direct democracy, but we need ultimately real representative democracy, at the very least. Because now this democracy is not representing many people's interests. It is representing a lot of people's interest. The center is representing the certain interest in double, triple, fourfold fashion. But there are many people who are outside of representation, and if those people are kept outside, then monsters are born from that exclusion.
I love that as a way to end. Thank you so much, Paolo,
Thank
Rachel,
you.
and Nadia, for being here with us. I hope you'll come back when we talk about other things
Yes,
that are adjacent to this.
yes. Thank you.
And next week, we're going to look at the Latin American pink wave that appears to not be manifesting as we thought it might be. So see you then.
Amazing.
See you.
See you. Bye-bye.